All right, today I'm honored to introduce James LaForce. James is the CEO of the firm LaForce, a highly regarded media and communications company from media relations to digital content to special events. Their clients include Veuve Clicquot, Target, Banana Republic, and Spotify, to name a few. Welcome, James.
Thank you. So glad to be here, Mark.
Yeah, we've crossed paths so many times through my career. To actually have a conversation with you is really exciting. You know,
Yeah.
from my days at Condé Nast to Housing Works to we've actually worked with your team through the years.
Yeah.
So now I want to
Well, I
hear
feel
about
like
you.
when we see each other, we're both in hyper event mode, with clients around us and guests at an event and, a lot on the line. So we both have that, we're all business and we never get to hang out. So it's nice to have this time to do that.
Yeah, that's so true. Now that you mention it, I'm like focused. I've watched you in back in the days of Condé Nast in the hallways, pacing back and forth. When we're at the magazines,
Yeah.
it's like very focused. So, tell me, your firm was named the most powerful PR firm by the Observer. Now, I want to hear how you got started in your company or in your career.
Great. Well, I do love my story of the business that I'm in and the kind of people I get to work with and the kinds of things I get to do uh, as a continuum from when I was a kid growing up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and desperately wanting to come to New York, wanting to come to a big city. My family would take me to Chicago, and I immediately, was energized by the excitement of the city and immediately wanted to raise the stakes to get to New York. And my parents got me a subscription to the New Yorker when I was 10 or something like that, which, no one could really understand why I wanted it. And one of the things I stared at was a little pen and ink drawing of an ad for something called Belgian shoes, which still exists as a little store on the Upper East Side today. They're
Really?
these very gay little slippers that only a little gay boy in Wisconsin would fantasize about. And I cut them out of the magazine and showed them to my mother, and they cost $45. So my mother laughed and thought, what on earth who would ever pay $45 for a pair of shoes in those days?
Right.
Um, much less these silly little slippers. So, it was just these little symbols of what New York meant, to me that I fantasized about. And I did come to the city to go to I think it was the 1963 World's Fair, the one in Queens that,
Oh,
you
wow.
drive by now. Um, and I remembered staying at the Waldorf Astoria and looking out the windows of Park Avenue. And, I was 10 years old or something. And thinking I've got to get here somehow. So after going to college a little bit in the Midwest, I ran away from college a couple of times, like ran away and came to New York and, bottomed out after 6 months and went back to school in the Midwest and then ran away again, literally running away from, my life, like dropping out of college. And the second time I hitchhiked to New York,
Oh, wow.
around the clock, like, just sticking my thumb out to get here, and then sort of crashed with a friend. That second time I did let my parents know where I was. And ultimately I worked in cater waitering, which is kind of how I made a living
Yep, I
and
did
how I
that. Yep.
first got introduced to events. And then I transferred my college credits to Columbia and finished at Columbia while working as a cater waiter at night for Glorious Food
Really?
and a caterer named Donald Bruce White, who was really before Glorious. Is it Glorious Foods or Glorious Food
I think it's
singular?
just food. I think,
Yeah,
yep,
Glorious Food.
singular.
So Donald had started, and I looked up in preparation for this interview. I looked up his obituary. He started something called the Telephone Chef in the 1960s. He was a Broadway actor, and he started this little service where you could call him and he would deliver you a chicken pot pie and in a little paper bag and a bottle of wine or something like that. And this was at a time when there was no such thing as food delivery
Right.
or even catering. And then started a catering company in the 70s. I went to work for him in the 80s. ran it out of a townhouse on the Upper East Side where he lived, and there was a kitchen in the back. This again was before Glorious Food, which is, would now be considered probably the oldest,
Right.
continuously running catering company in New York. So in addition to being a waiter for him, again, going to school, going to finishing my college career at Columbia during the day and then working for him at night, I started helping him sort of manage the business and start to manage the events. So that
Oh.
was my first experience around the notion of a client. And I love the service piece of it. I've always loved waiting on people. And one of your other guests, Michelle Rago, said the same thing. She said born to serve or something, or
Sure.
always in service. And there's definitely, I come at it still today with this feeling that as I interview young people, I'm always looking for people who have food service experience, bartending experience, someone who understands what it's like to just have a customer who wants to be taken care of, and finding a way to make them happy and make them comfortable. So it's something I learned very early on, in my experiences with Donald, and watched as Donald's business sort of got replaced by these bigger, fancier companies like Glorious. So he was very sort of territorial about those of us who worked for Donald and who worked for Glorious, and some waiters were in such demand that and could get away with working for both places. And so after some years with Donald, I finished college, and through a friend met Eleanor Lambert,
Hmm.
who I had sort of heard about in the kind of event
Right. Fashion too.
world.
Yep.
And she had this you know anchor in the fashion industry, and there's a biography about her that our friend John Tiffany wrote, um, that sort of solidifies her place in American fashion history. But she created the Council of Fashion Designers of America,
Oh,
and
okay.
she created something called the Coty Awards
Hmm.
first, which then became the Council of Fashion Designers of America, which still exists today. And she represented all the American designers, and she was in her 80s when I went to work for her.
Wow.
I think she was early 80s, and she had sold her company to a kind of corporate communications agency that didn't really understand what they'd acquired, and she just thought that it was a good opportunity. They thought she was going to introduce them to all sorts of people that they didn't know.
Hmm.
She just was really looking for somebody to help, give her the infrastructure that she needed.
Hmm.
And I was one of about 10 people that worked alongside her, and learned the PR business from her. And it was incredibly inspiring. I mean, at my age, at that stage of my life, to be introduced to this world where we worked for Bill Blass and
Hmm.
Tiffany and Oscar de la Renta, and she was going to Le Cirque every day for lunch and going to Kenneth every morning to have her
So
hair done, and
glamorous.
it was just this kind of the era of the New York car service. The
Right.
idea that a car was kind of hovering. She's 80 years old, and I would call my mother back in Wisconsin, who I suppose was then like in her late 50s, and I think it was just another world, that there was this high powered, uh, really engaged, successful woman working in business in New York who was in her 80s, and was being squired around town in these sedan cars,
Hmm.
and the whole staff in the office was responsible for keeping track of where she was and what car was waiting for her, and was she working from home this morning. And I would go and sit next to her. She'd work from her bed, and I'd sit at the foot of her bed, and she'd hand me sheets of paper that she'd be writing on her little breakfast tray, in her Fifth Avenue apartment overlooking Central Park and the
Right.
reservoir. Um, and then she had parties. She created something called the International Best Dressed List, which again was just another PR stunt to promote American fashion, and it became a very famous thing. And Amy Fine Collins has now written a book about it, and it's I believe kind of owned by, I want to say, Airmail, the media company
Right.
that
Okay.
Graydon Carter owns, because I think Amy Fine Collins now produces the list with them, or it's still owned by Vanity Fair. I could have that wrong, but it was this great sort of PR invention that once a year we would announce. She'd convene this committee that was Andre Leontali and Bob Colacello and Elsa Clench and Ann Slater and Ronaldo Herrera and all these kind of figures from the
Very New York.
the fashion scene, at that time. I guess this is the late 80s, early 90s, and they would kind of decide, who was going to be best dressed that year in women and men, and then we'd put this press release out, and it would run everywhere, and I would hand deliver it to Eugenia. I was going to say Eugenia Shepherd. I'm getting a little mixed up now. I'd hand deliver it to Susie. Well, I'm sorry, I'm blanking. We might have to forget that part.
That's okay.
Aileen Maley, who was called Susie, her column, which ran in Women's Wear Daily, and she had always had an exclusive on breaking the news of who the best dressed people in America were. It was just a completely different time, and
it was.
To the point where I can't even remember who anybody was, but it doesn't really have that much relevance today. I think it's all sort of packed in my brain somewhere there. These experiences of kind of New York in that era.
Right. Yeah. It definitely trains you. I feel the same way, because when I worked at Condé Nast, and you've worked at Condé Nast, and, I worked at Traveler and everything, same thing. And somebody asked me, back in the day, it's like the devil wears Prada. I'm like, a lot of it's true, just that kind of feel, and it stayed around, and it trained you though. I mean, it's a different time. It wouldn't happen necessarily now, but it trains your brain in how to, serve clients better, I think.
Yeah. Well, there were lots of things that now we look back on that time and realize were not great about the dynamics, gender dynamics, race dynamics, how people were treated, the kind of liberties that people in power took over people that were not, had less power. All those things have to be, reconsidered, and I'm certainly glad that they are, and that we're looking back on that and recognizing that wasn't great. But there was a lot of good, in how things happened, and for those of us, I really wasn't in power. I was sort of at the low end of the totem pole.
Me too.
I appreciate the era. I guess I don't have to regret it as much, because I don't feel guilty about, I was on the receiving end.
I was too. I would be like, and people laugh at me, because there was one time when we were traveling at Condé Nast Traveler, and somebody had to get to a meeting, and they're like, just get a helicopter. I'm like, okay, I'm just doing what I'm told. Okay. Yeah. It seems so crazy now.
I think I was doing an event in the Hamptons, and somebody was working on an event at Ron Perlman's house, who's in the news these days. And she was able to get a ride home from on the Ron Perlman helicopter. And she said to the helicopter pilot, well, it's so nice that you're able to give me a ride. And he said, well, we were going in anyway. We had to we had to return the VCRs to Blockbuster, the VCR tapes, God. The VHS tapes. You remember when we had would get the VHS tapes out for 3 days or something, and then you had to drop them in the box.
Yeah, just take the helicopter to drop it off in the box. Yeah. That is crazy. But yeah, it was a different time. Not to say it doesn't exist. I do hear, here and there, but yeah, it definitely trains how you think, and you kind of, now looking back, you're just like, all right, and talking to new people, it's like, nah, don't worry, it's not like it used to be. So tell me when you started your company and why.
Well, so then after my stint with Eleanor Lambert, which was probably too many years, I mean, I was 5 years with her. And I certainly got better at the business. I learned a lot, but it was all about, she was a one-man band, and the team around her was just there to support her. So a bigger agency a bigger PR agency that was owned by an advertising agency recruited me, and I went to work there, where I could work on bigger brands and be in a more democratic structure with a bigger team and a company run by women. And when I went on the job interview, I was just kind of, indifferent about it. I mean, I wasn't. It wasn't like I had at that stage in my life that I had a lot of focus uh, or ambition. I just, I was kind of having fun and enjoying myself in New York, and my work was always entertaining. So I wasn't desperately looking to leave Eleanor. I did recognize that it probably was sort of a gilded cage, and
Mm-hmm.
that I might learn more or have a more interesting time at a different situation. So I went to this place, and it had really jazzy offices, like a big contemporary art collection. It was designed by it was called a division of Chiat Day,
Right.
and Jay Chiat was a art collector and a famous advertising guy who'd been very successful, and that agency, Chiat Day, had acquired this PR agency, which doesn't exist any longer. And and the guy who interviewed me in the job was really cute, and I, was as we could be in those days. And since remember, I'm the interviewee, I was
Right.
pretty flirtatious, and he was completely threatened by my flirtatiousness because I was like interviewing for a job. It's like, well, what the hell, and so anyway, I he told the people at the company that I didn't seem like it was a good fit. Luckily, the women who all ran the company liked me enough that they overrode his decision and hired me. And then I ended up marrying him, and we've been together for 32
Oh,
years.
okay. All right. So that's your
So
husband now. Okay.
yeah,
Now I
exactly.
now I have the backstory.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So Stephen Henderson had been working in PR, worked at Edelman agencies and whatever. So I really went from learning a lot from Eleanor Lambert to learning a lot from my husband now of all these years, who was kind of my boss. He was a little senior to me, but we were kind of, at the same sort. He was a notch above me, and he certainly had more experience in that kind of big brand PR. So we worked together there at that agency for a year or so as we were sort of starting a relationship, and then it seemed inappropriate, uh, a little bit, and uncomfortable for us because we were having this personal relationship to also be working together. So he went and found another gig at another firm, and I ended up being quite successful at that agency
Hmm.
where he hired me, and we stayed together. And then another agency after that, and then one day it just dawned on me that you know I had enough client relationships,
Right.
and it was a very simple formula in those days, which is that I could have 3 or 4 clients that were paying me $5,000 a month
Hmm.
as a retainer, and they were fashion companies and a Condé Nast magazine. I think my first Condé Nast magazine was Glamour was my client, and I think that
It's a good
the
one.
publisher and the editor paid me $5,000 a month, and I just said, "Look, I can do it myself." I had some people helping me, and I worked out of my apartment on the Upper West Side. I had a doorman,
Hmm.
and messengers would come all day and pick up press releases that I would, type up and put into envelopes.
Right.
And
Couldn't
we all
PDF
had,
them.
yeah, and we all and I still ride a bike around New York, and I rode a bike then, and so I would ride my bike around to my client meetings and drop off, press releases and press kits to media outlets and use messengers a lot, which is, as in those days, was very common. There were
Yep.
bike messengers all over the city. So I got to start the business, really with my bare hands and with
Hmm.
very little investment on my own. I mean, I happened to have a nice big apartment. I could put in extra phone lines. I set up card tables in the living room, in the dining room, in the kitchen for people who were helping me, all young, great women, college, just recent college graduates, and I was only a few years older than they were, um, and it went humming along. And with in those days, to have $4,000 or $5,000 a month clients and be
Nice.
making $20,000 a month was enough to pay the people who were working for me by the hour, and make an income that was similar to what I was doing at agencies, and it just sort of went from there. And now it's, I don't know, almost 30 years later.
Wow. No, it's impressive. You could just see the evolution. And that's why I said I used to see you in the Condé Nast elevators, doing work, um, always just kind of, you were just always there. I was at various magazines, and you were like I don't want to say a fixture, but you were,
Yeah,
I was like, and I didn't really know who you were. I'll be honest with you. It kind of were like part of the team, part of the Condé
yeah,
Nast culture
yeah.
over there. And I think
Well,
too,
I mean,
yeah,
as you talk about, as we talk about, virtual versus in person, I mean, there was a thing about just, you know, showing up.
mm-hmm. You had to be
There
there.
was the Woody Allen expression, like, what is it? 90% of life is just, showing up, just being
Right.
there. And so it did dawn on me early on that, like, whenever I could get to a meeting, I would go to a meeting. Whenever there was an event to go to, I'd go to the event. Whenever there was a cocktail. And, I didn't, even then could get a little cynical about these things, but I always would tell myself, go for 15 minutes, talk to two
True.
people, give them a business card, ask them a question. It's not going to kill you. And,
Right.
it really could be one of the elements that's made me as successful as I am, is just the physical, we're so lucky to live in a city with the kind of density that we have, and that there are places to go, even,
Right.
even now, even in the era that we're living in New York, you can still be sort of locked down at home. But if you go sniffing around the city, you'll find that there are people gathering.
Right, and the city's not that big. It's only
Right.
12 miles, so you probably will see somebody And we were talking in the last interview that I was doing with Fern Malice. She said the same thing. You just telling new people, just go out, get out
Yeah.
there, be seen. She's had all these invites. There's a lot to be said about that. So looking, I mean, this whole time has changed a lot, and you were primarily PR. I see you've expanded a lot. You do a lot of events. We've worked with you in a few events. How has the landscape changed in the last 5 years, let's say? And where do you see it going the next five? I'm giving a small window of 5 and 5.
Sure. Well, I think in the last 5 years, we've gone from, and I would say the last 5 years we've been a part of this, kind of go big or go home,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, atmosphere around our business, around our clients, around, budgets, that it almost as though if you can't create a spectacle, and you can't, really significantly move the needle with something, don't bother. And luckily, I've been working with a lot of clients that do have the big enough budgets to produce events at such a scale that they really do move the needle
Mm-hmm.
on in a lot of ways. And we can bake in elements like paid influencer content,
Right.
and media capture of the event itself that then resonates across paid social media and electronic media. So uh, certainly, taking the lockdown and the pandemic aside, uh, that in a way still seems to be the pervasive, atmosphere around the business. Then in there, whether you say the pandemic or not, that the notion of the virtual event, the notion of the Zoom gathering like we're doing now,
Right.
has certainly changed and disrupted the way a lot of us work, and on the one hand made a craving for people wanting to do big events because there's so few of them. There have been so few, and then recognizing that a lot of things can be accomplished very efficiently,
Right.
via Zoom, and via a kind of virtual gathering of things. So the uh, the notion that the event can be a lot more than just for the attendees, that it
Mm-hmm.
can become content, and visual content, and it can generate news with celebrity attendance or influencer attendance, means that events take on a whole new role. They're no longer just there to entertain people and make people walk away and say, I had a really nice time. They're meant to be reflected on everybody's media channel, and to be a content vehicle for a
Right.
brand.
Right. And I think, COVID definitely accelerated that a bit. We realized, like you were saying, you don't necessarily need to do the big projects anymore. I mean, I've seen some of the projects we've done. We invite 1,000 people. Can't do that necessarily, but maybe you invite 100, and then the rest is digital content that's still going on and accomplishing the goal. And people are like, wow, that really worked.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see where this goes from there.
Mm-hmm.
So, looking back on your career, what would you say is the most memorable event or project that you've worked on, and why?
Well,
You've been-
I hope that there'll be a new one, but in other words, now I look back on something that's very antique from the time that, so it would have been almost 30 years ago, because Stephen and I were just kind of starting our relationship, and we our agency was hired by a kind of beauty company called Collagen Biomedical,
okay.
which was the company that made the stuff that women were injecting into their lips to give them big pouty lips, which you still see
Oh.
now, but I don't know if people use collagen. You hear the word fillers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I know there's a whole industry now around, having a little work done. But it was very new then. The whole idea of, kind of, there were certainly facelifts and there was plastic surgery, and this company wanted to sort of capitalize on the fact that Madonna had gotten a lot of publicity for sort of puffing up her lips.
Mm,
Her lips looked especially plump, and
right.
the fashion and beauty and celebrity media had noticed it. So Collagen wanted us to sort of come up with a with a sort of turning the injection process into a fashion idea. So their marketing people came up with something called the Paris lip, which is a certain technique on how to inject the filler into the lip. And they found a plastic surgeon in Paris who had sort of invented this technique, and they wanted to promote it. So here we were in New York coming up with this thing, and we were just in the brainstorming meeting about lips and what do you do about lips. And so I suggested, because of my fashion experience, that we could go to Couture Week in Paris. I think it was the July couture shows. It happens twice a year that
Mm-hmm.
the French designers show the couture to a very limited number of editors. And it's sort of still to this day, PR people know that if you want to kind of pull a stunt, you're more likely to get some attention during the couture week, because it's not
Correct.
so competitive.
Yep.
There's not so many fashion shows going on, and so many celebrities going to so many shows. And that's was true to some degree then, and is more true now than ever. So we we came up with this idea of unveiling the Paris lip at a press conference at the Ritz Hotel in Paris during Couture Week, when all the American fashion press were in Paris for the shows, and we're kind of like looking for things. In those days, they were kind of looking for things to do, and we just knew that if we made the invitation over the top, and we did it at the Ritz, where people always wanted to go,
Right.
um, that we would, we'd get their attention. Then we added to the mix, and again, my early work with celebrities was we decided we knew we could get Lauren Bacall. Somebody said Lauren Bacall is available to do these kinds of things, and Lauren Bacall is in a famous scene in the movie called, I think, Key Largo, where she
Right.
says to Humphrey Bogart, "You know how to whistle, don't you? Just put your lips together and blow." So the entire idea was based on this one obscure scene from a classic Hollywood film noir of the 1950s. Um, and and we played that scene on the screen, and Lauren Bacall came out and did a little talk about famous lips in Hollywood, which was a slideshow that Stephen and I put together of just images of Hollywood stars, and their great lips, and talking about their shape and all that kind of sort of thing. We flew Lauren Bacall to Paris on the Concorde, and we paid her with a Birkin bag from Hermes. She didn't want any cash because she'd have to declare it on her
Right.
taxes. So in those days, I guess we could just stroll in and buy a Birkin bag
Right,
or
right.
an
That
Hermes bag. I don't know.
right.
Yeah.
It's probably worth
And
more now, but she was
yeah,
smart. She knew what
yeah,
she was
she
doing.
knew, yeah, her heirs still have that bag. And so then we rolled out a subject, like a woman came out and laid on a table, and we had these big TV monitors, or TV cameras, so everyone could see a close up of the guy actually injecting the stuff
Oh, okay.
in the lips of the woman, while they're all sitting in their little ballroom chairs in a little, ballroom, meeting room at the Ritz. And there's a little drip of blood that came when he injected the needle, a
Mm-hmm.
little drip, and he has his little quivering hands because he was so nervous, dabbed the blood. And the USA Today reporter fainted, fell off her chair. So it was written up in every media outlet. It was so completely perverse and kind of over the top, and it was a great boon for college and biomedical. We had the dumb luck that Madonna was staying at the Ritz Hotel at the very time that we did the press conference, so it got sort of compounded into the press. And it was written about in the New Yorker and all these places that are sort of impossible to pitch or get stories in. And everybody had a great time.
What a
It was one of these kind of crazy, stunty, old-fashioned kind of things that, to me, I am still inspired by how something as kind of mundane as,
mm-hmm.
you know, getting your lips injected can be turned into something that's, so over the top.
What a great story. I mean, and you can see it now, in social media. I'm shocked by some of the stuff that gets attention, lots and lots of followers, and so mundane. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
if that's what people are watching, that's what people are watching.
Yeah. Well, somebody was showing me their channel last night, a beauty influencer who's selling beauty products, a particular brand. She represents a brand, and it's kind of I don't want to use the word pyramid scheme, but it's a little bit of that, one of those,
Mhm.
tiered
Right.
things where you get other people to sell products for you. And she said that she has very few followers, but they're extremely engaged
Mm-hmm.
in her very normal life, her very everyday life. And she is not a movie. I mean, she does use sort of a filter on her face, but she shows her followers, her going to the grocery store and her having her mother over. And it's not the glamorous kind of Real Housewives of
Right.
Instagram kind of look at all. So it really is a very different time that we live in, where there's actually uh, an audience for just reality,
Right.
for just the mundane, as you
Right.
say, which does speak to a very different time that we live in, where I think people are so sick of fantasy, and
Mm-hmm.
that reality is the new fantasy.
Right. Reality is the new fantasy. I love that. I'm going to write that down. Reality is the new fantasy. So, a couple questions I ask all the guests.
Mhm.
You have a lot of clients, the people who come to you and need your services. So, I ask, what advice would you give a potential client to best, so that you can serve them best, like help me help you kind of thing? So that's one. And then the other thing is, what advice would you give somebody starting out who wanted to do what you're doing?
Great. Well, I think for the client, where I am now in conversations with clients, which is a great place to be, is that I always want to make sure we're the right fit for, that we have the right capabilities for what they're looking for. And I try to have the most candid conversations with clients at the very first meeting, when I immediately am trying to determine whether we can work together, whether it's a good fit. And so I do sort of challenge them on what their expectations are, what their budget is, what their reason for wanting to engage with an agency like ours is. And I really do try to help people find the right company, the right individual, the right strategy that will work for them. And if we can be a part of it and we can help them get there, great. But if either I fundamentally disagree with what they're trying to do and think that it's very unlikely that they will be successful, then I can just tell them that at the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
before we go any further. And I try to do it in a really open-minded way. But I'll say to someone, I don't think anyone's going to be able to do that for you. Or I'll say to them, I think you'd be better off hiring somebody in-house to work on it, because that's going to take a while. And it's not the kind of thing an agency can just jump in and fix for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a endemic or systemic problem that you have with your business. And I don't think I'll be able to solve it. I think a lot of what's great about our industry is that, and great about our network, and I include you in my network, is that we all know so many great people who do incredibly
True.
things that are suited. We can often find a match among
Mm-hmm.
my Rolodex of relationships. And it's like, I know this great person who's looking for a job, or I know this great smaller agency or bigger agency, or agency that specializes in crisis management, or agency that specializes in multicultural marketing, or whatever the unique need that the client has. In the old days, when I started in the business, there were only a few people doing what you and I do.
True.
Now there are hundreds of companies that have gotten created. I hope many of them sort of inspired by people like me, who showed how how possible it is to start your own business. And we've seen just this. I mean, a lot of your guests on your show are owner operators, right? Who have
True.
people who started businesses on their own. So to me, all those people there, if we can help everybody find the right fit, yeah, usually I think when relationships sour, it's not the fault of the client or the service provider. It's just not a good match.
Right.
The client didn't pick the right agency, and the agency wanted to try to be successful with the client, thought they could maybe stretch in areas that they weren't good at, and possibly it would work, but they might have been better off saying, you know what, this isn't really the right thing for us.
Right.
So I put a lot of energy into really looking at the people on my staff, and whether they're the right fit for the client, and getting the client to understand what their expectations are, and be realistic about what can be achieved in working together.
That makes a lot of sense. And I always get nervous when somebody says they're full service. I'm like, is that,
Yeah.
you can't be everything to everybody.
Yeah.
And then lastly, what advice would you give somebody starting out?
Well, I'm absolutely in the Fern Malice school, which is, get yourself out there, be unique. I encounter so many young people who come into our company and work as interns or whatever, and there's a consistent, kind of, everybody's incredibly polite, and tries hard, and is earnest and hardworking, and I so appreciate that, and I'm not taking that for granted. But people are surprisingly, I find, conventional. Everybody
Interesting.
sort of falls into a very specific kind of prototype, let's say. Are I, I'm looking for a unique experience in their life, a unique perspective, and so I think to stand out, as a candidate for a job, or as a service provider, you know, it's a lot about just confidence and believing in your own story and your own act, let's say.
Right.
And so I really do encourage people to break out of sort of normative roles. In every job interview I do with people, I want to find out what's unique about them, and people don't seem to be too comfortable wanting to talk that way. They keep kind of wanting to remind me about their kind of conventional experiences, you know,
Interesting.
like I'm
Interesting.
just like everybody else. And it's like, well, really what I'm looking for is somebody who's not like everybody else. because, the agency wants to have a diverse offer, and you're going to bring so much more to our company and to our clients if there's something that you do that nobody else here does.
Wow, that's interesting. It's interesting because I have my daughter's 18, trying to get into college right now, and it's kind of the same advice.
Yes.
A college is trying to make a community of unique people. Everybody shouldn't be the same. You want this diversity, so do what we kind of helping her in this process of being unique and standing out. And hopefully that now I can see it not only translate to college, but in life to jobs, and it should stay with you your entire career.
Yeah. Well, I think I just want to say, for your daughter, I think social media has washed over all these people, and it's actually, you'd think it would have encouraged them to be more unique, but somehow they see so much that they end up, their reaction to all the crazy things they see on social media is to actually be more normal.
Interesting.
It's sort of it's a survival tactic. I totally get it. It's like, so Instagram is so crazy and TikTok is so kind of goofy, and so they sort of find their channel for goofiness that way. Right. And then their life appears conventional. And I think it is just a matter of how you have to look at things,
I agree. It's you put all your craziness out in social and like bring it to the real life.
That's right.
Well, this has been incredible, and I really thank you for giving the insight and sharing all your advice. Anybody can learn from this, and we can continue talking for a long time, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you at the Housing Works benefit.
Yes, absolutely.
In April,
we're very excited that we're back in real life, and it's happening, right?
It's happening. Yep, we had a talk yesterday.
Great.
It's happening.
Okay, great. Okay, good.
Thanks for listening to Creating the Perfect Experience. To get in touch and learn more, visit markstevenagency.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, let us know by leaving us a review or posting about us on social media. We love to see it. Until next time.